So one of the questions then that I'll often get, which is a natural question, well, where do you get this information? Because I've had a lot of teachers say to me, as part of my teacher preparation program, I wasn't given that information. I wasn't trained in research. I didn't have a research course. I don't know how to evaluate research. I don't know where to find this research. So that sets the stage where people then are very much open and susceptible to the persuasion of phenomenology and authoritarian types of truth. So this is a partial listing of resources available to you that are designed to help people sift through information to make the best decisions. I'm going to take you through the National Clearinghouse on Autism Evidence and Practice. Also, I've mentioned to you a couple times now the National Autism Center Standards Report, first published in 2009, updated in phase 2 in 2015. Actually, I added over the lunch period a couple bits of information to that I'll share with you. It's not in your handout, but if you Google the National Autism Center Standards Report, you can download the PDF from their website. And then the third thing I'll mention is the Ontario Association for Behavior Analysis. They published a really rigorous review of the literature not that long ago. It's pretty, all of these, it's probably the freshest, the most recent. Evidence-based practices for individuals with autism spectrum disorder, recommendations for caregivers, practitioners, and policy makers. So I'd encourage any of you in special education to go to the Ontario Association for Behavior Analysis on ABBA website, and you can download that excellent resource for free. It's pretty weighty. There's a lot of stuff in there to sift through. So the National Standards Report, I mentioned earlier, they create a kind of test of the literature, right? It's a set of standards, and they apply research on a particular tactic to their criterion, and then the criterion will spit out one of three decisions or conclusions: established, meets their criterion; emerging, or unestablished. And I mentioned that yesterday. I want to quickly run you through what those lists are, just an FYI. So this is the established list. You'll notice there are exactly 11 established treatments or interventions for people with autism according to the NAC. Antecedent package is behavior analysis. Behavioral package is a behavioral science ABA approach. Comprehensive behavioral treatment for young children is what most people know as early intensive behavioral intervention. That's an intensive, developmentally sequenced, home-based program that kids would start in preschool. Joint attention intervention, a tremendous amount of the literature there comes from the behavior analytic literature. Modeling comes from behavior analytic literature. Teaching in the natural environment as well. Peer training packages, a lot of that is done in behavior analytic literature. Pivotal response treatment is a type of behavioral intervention for children with autism. You can think of that as growing out of the third one there, the comprehensive behavioral treatment of young children. If the comprehensive behavioral treatment of young children is a very intensive adult-directed, the pivotal response is kind of at the other end of the spectrum in terms of it being kind of more naturalistic and child-led or influenced, but still entirely behavior analytic. Schedules, self-management, a lot of that comes out of the behavior analytic literature, and story-based intervention packages. Again, a lot of that in the behavior analytic literature. And you can also be thinking of social stories here, which capitalize on rule-governed behavior. So there's a huge influence in the established list of behavioral science-based interventions. Then when you look at the emerging, and keep in mind emerging means there's some research, but it doesn't meet their threshold to qualify as evidence-based or established. You have AAC devices, 14 studies, but even with 14 studies that they looked at this period of time, didn't cross their threshold. Although other sources will indicate that AAC is evidence-based. Cognitive behavioral intervention, developmental relationship-based treatments, exercise, exposure packages, imitation-based interactions, which would be behavior analytic, initiation training, language training for production and understanding, massage or touch therapy, 2 studies there. Multi-component package, you see music therapy, peer interventions, picture exchange communication system. Interesting, you always have to understand when you look at these that this is one type of standard that's being used. It's not a universal truth. There are many, many more than just 13 studies on picture exchange communication. Reductive package, scripting, sign language use, social communication, social skills, structured teaching, technology-based, and theory of mind training with 4 studies. So this is the emerging group according to the National Autism Center standards. They are just an example of standards, not a universal truth. Here is their unestablished list, failing to meet levels of evidence. So at the top, as I mentioned yesterday, is academic intervention. That is business as usual. Just take the student with special needs, autism for our purposes, and plug them into regular education, not an evidence-based practice. That's why we need special education. You also see auditory integration training, FC, gluten casein-free diet, and sensory integrative package there is unestablished. So this is an example of a reputable source in the community where people have analyzed the literature, and you can go and look at it as a special educator or as a parent advocating for your child to recommend strategies at school. This is the other resource that I mentioned, the clearinghouse, and they've taken a different approach. They have a different set of standards, and as a result, they have different conclusions. And so the way I've organized this is, here's the list of interventions that is alphabetic. Here's the source, or the kind of the professional domain from which the research and practice tends to occur. I see a lot of it is behavior analytic, and the number of studies that they've looked at or considered from 1990 up until 2017. And just to kind of make the point visually, this shows in green the interventions according to the clearinghouse resource that are behavior analytic in nature. And you'll see that it's mostly green. They have exercise and movement there with 17 studies. They have sensory integration there with only 3 studies. So again, sensory integration, according to the National Autism Center, is an unestablished treatment. According to this resource, it meets their criteria for established, although with very limited research, you'll notice that it has basically the smallest number of studies compared to all of these other options there, or interventions, or tactics. So again, I'm sharing this FYI so that you know you can apply your 3 systems of truth and you can follow the empirical truth, and these are sources of empirical truth. The final thing that I'll mention is the Ontario Association document, Evidence-Based Practices for Individuals with Autism Spectrum Disorder. This is a very thorough document, and they've actually looked at some of the other sources I've already mentioned and others and summarized those. So there's a tremendous amount of information here. It's very current. I encourage you to check that out. It looks at other interventions that are not considered by the 2 others that I've just described to you. So this is in the spirit of information sharing, awareness raising, so that you know where to go looking for tactics.